Right now, in this very instant, I need you to set everything else aside. Because what is flowing toward you through these words is not something the algorithm randomly placed in front of your eyes. And if something inside you slowed down when you saw this, if something quiet but unmistakable told you to stop scrolling and actually pay attention, then you need to understand that nudge was not coming from you. It was coming from the one who has been watching every single detail of your life with a love so precise and so personal that it knew exactly when you needed to hear exactly this. And it made sure you were here for it. This is not a motivational speech. This is not a pep talk designed to make you feel temporarily better before the weight of real life settles back onto your shoulders. This is a direct and deliberate communication from the heart of the one who breathed you into existence, traveling through every word I am about to speak, aimed at the deepest and most hidden part of who you are. And I am asking you with everything in me to stay until the very last sentence, because at the end of what I am about to share with you, I am going to hand you something specific, something you can actually hold on to, something that will function as a key in the door of the breakthrough you have been standing in front of for what feels like an unbearable amount of time. I have been holding that key. I have been watching you. I have been present in every room you walked through, every decision you wrestled with, every moment you thought you were completely invisible to the rest of the universe. And today is the day I have looked at where you are and where I have prepared for you to go and declared that you are ready. If you turn away before the final word of this message, you will be walking away from the exact answer your spirit has been reaching for in your most private and most desperate moments. You have asked me for a sign. You have asked me to show you that the silence was not indifference. You have asked me to prove that the pain you have been managing alone has not been floating unnoticed through an empty sky. This moment right here is that proof. Do not let it dissolve into the background noise of another busy day. Let it reach you. Let it actually land. Type 555 right now if you feel something stirring in you as these words move through you. And let the people around you see that you are open to receiving what has been sent specifically for you today. The depth of my attention toward you is something your mind will never fully be able to measure, because it has not been limited to the chapters of your life that made sense. It has not been reserved for the days when you showed up with clean hands and clear faith and steady confidence. It has covered every version of you, including the version that was barely functional, including the version that was running on nothing but obligation and exhaustion, including the version that looked completely put together on the outside, while quietly falling apart on the inside in ways that nobody around you was close enough to notice. I noticed, I have always noticed, the mornings you woke up before the sun, with a chest full of something heavy that did not have a proper name. The afternoons you sat in meetings or conversations and smiled in all the right places while somewhere behind your eyes, a completely different reality was happening. The evenings you came home and let the mask come off and just sat for a minute in the honest weight of how tired you actually were. I was in every single one of those moments, not watching from a distance, not observing with detachment, but present with you in it, feeling the weight of it, carrying what you could not carry alone. Every prayer you sent up, no matter how fragmented, no matter how uncertain, No matter how soaked in doubt or exhaustion or barely contained frustration, every single one of them arrived. Not one bounced back. Not one got lost in transit. Not one was too messy or too inconsistent or too theologically impure to reach my ears. You prayed in the car with your hands on the steering wheel and tears you were not expecting. You prayed in the shower where no one could see the crying. You prayed in short, desperate sentences in the middle of the night when sleep had abandoned you, and your mind was running through every worst-case scenario it could manufacture. Every single one of those reached me. You are not a person whose voice disappears before it gets anywhere. You are heard. You have always been heard. Type Amen right now if that truth is landing somewhere real inside of you, and let it be visible, because someone else who is walking through their own silence needs to see that another person believes they are heard too. The road you have been on has not been punishment. I know it wore the costume of punishment sometimes. I know there were stretches of it that looked so much like divine abandonment that even the most resilient part of you started to wonder. When doors that should have opened stayed sealed. When relationships that should have been safe turned out to be anything but. When the effort you poured into something real and important produced outcomes that made no sense given everything you had invested. When you looked around at other people's lives and watched things fall into place for them that seemed to refuse to fall into place for you no matter what you did, or how hard you tried, or how long you waited. In those moments, the question that rose up inside you was completely legitimate, and I never held it against you. You asked me what you had done wrong. You asked me if I was angry. You asked me if your faith had simply run out of road. And I want to answer that question directly and completely right now because it deserves a real answer. You did not do anything wrong. I was not angry. Your faith had not run out of road. What was actually happening in every single one of those seasons that felt like closed doors and stripped away progress and relentless delay was something that had nothing to do with punishment and everything to do with preparation. I was not closing doors to hurt you. I was closing doors to protect you. I was protecting you from rooms that looked like what you needed, but would have cost you things you did not yet understand were precious. I was protecting you from relationships that had expiration dates written into their foundations, from opportunities that would have opened into spaces you did not yet have the internal architecture to navigate without being consumed by them. I was not your adversary in those seasons. I was your most committed defender, working on your behalf in dimensions you did not have access to see, rearranging circumstances, removing obstacles, redirecting paths, positioning people, and building the internal strength in you that is the only thing capable of sustaining what I am about to release into your life. Share this with someone tonight who has been asking why their doors keep closing. Because someone in your circle needs to hear that closed doors are not the end of the story. I want to go back with you now to a specific kind of pain, the kind that came not from circumstance but from people, because I know that is where some of your deepest wounds live. There was someone, and you know who I am talking about without me having to say the name, someone whose presence in your life felt like solid ground, someone you had let past the outer walls you kept up for protection, someone whose voice carried weight with you in a way that most voices did not. And something happened with that person that rearranged things inside you in ways that took a very long time to even fully map. Maybe they left. Maybe they stayed but became someone unrecognizable. Maybe they said something that revealed a version of themselves that shattered the version you had trusted so completely. Whatever the specific shape of it, the result was a wound that went deeper than most wounds go, because it came from a direction you had specifically left unguarded. And in the aftermath of that, something shifted in how you understood yourself. The question that the enemy planted in the soil of that wound was not just what is wrong with them, it was what is wrong with me. You started doing the math on your own lovability in ways that always seemed to come up short. You looked at the empty space where that person used to stand and absorbed some of the blame for their departure, as though if you had only been more or different or better, the outcome would have been different. I watched you do that. I watched you take on a weight that was never yours to carry. I watched you forgive quietly and move forward publicly while privately still sitting in the rubble of something that genuinely broke you, showing up for everyone around you with a generosity that cost you more than anyone knew, because you were giving from a place that had not yet been refilled. Type 222, if you have ever carried pain in silence, because you did not want your struggle to become a burden on the people around you. And know that the very fact that you carried it that way says something extraordinary about the depth of your character. What I want you to receive now about that wound is this: the departure of that person was not a verdict on your value. Their inability to stay, their choice to wound rather than protect, their failure to honor what you offered them, none of that was heaven's way of agreeing with the worst things you have thought about yourself in your lowest moments. Some people are only meant to walk with you for a portion of the road, and when the portion ends, their leaving is not a referendum on your worth. It is simply the natural end of an assignment, even if the way they handled the end was painful and wrong and left damage in its wake. But here is what I also need you to hear. Every single thing that was taken from you in that season, every investment of love and trust and time and energy that did not return to you the way it should have, I am accounting for all of it. I am not offering you a discounted reconstruction of what was lost. I am rebuilding it completely, with my own hands, into something that the original could never have become. Because what I build is built on a foundation that human inconsistency cannot erode. The restoration coming toward you is not a consolation prize. It is the real thing, fuller than the original, more rooted, more sustainable, carrying the added dimension of everything you learned about yourself in the fire of what you went through. Type 555 and type Amen right now if you receive that promise, and let your declaration of faith be seen by the people around you who need to know that restoration is real. Now I want to talk about the nights, because the nights are where I want to meet you most directly in this message. There were nights in this season you have been living through that were a specific kind of difficult that daytime does not prepare you for. The nights when the quiet became loud in the worst possible way. When the absence of distraction meant the full weight of everything you were carrying had nowhere to go except directly into your chest. When you lay in the dark, and the dark felt like it was agreeing with every fear you had been fighting off all day. Those nights tested something in you that is very hard to test in any other environment. They tested whether you could hold onto a hope you could not see, in a silence that offered no reassurance, with nothing but the frailest thread of trust to keep you from letting go completely. And you held on, not perfectly, not without wavering, not without some nights when the thread got so thin you were not sure it would survive until morning, but it survived, and so did you. And I want you to understand what was actually happening in those nights that felt like pure abandonment. The silence was not absence. I was there in it, closer than I am in the loud and obvious moments, closer than I am when the evidence is easy to point to, closer than I am when faith requires nothing of you because everything visible is confirming what you believe. In the darkness and the silence and the stripping away of everything that would normally make trust easy, I was right there, holding more of your weight than you knew needed to be held, keeping more of you intact than you realized was at risk, making sure that when morning came you would still be there to meet it. Comment Amen and type 555 below this if there was a night in your recent past that you survived, and you are only now beginning to understand that you did not survive it alone. I want to address the delays now with full honesty because I know the waiting has been one of the sharpest edges of this season. Not just the suffering, as real as that has been, but the duration of it. The sense that you were operating on a timeline that kept getting extended without explanation. The feeling of being so close and then watching the ground shift again and finding yourself back at the beginning of another waiting period with no clear indication of when it would end. I know how that particular experience wears on a person. I know how many times you had to reach into yourself for a resource that felt like it had been completely depleted and somehow come up with just enough to keep moving forward one more day. The thing I want you to understand about every single one of those moments of scarcity is that the just enough was not accidental. It was not the universe being stingy with you. It was me, carefully and deliberately providing exactly what you needed to survive each specific moment, without removing the experience of needing to trust me for what came next. I was teaching you something in that. I was teaching you that you could trust me in conditions where trust is genuinely difficult, in conditions where nothing visible is confirming what I have promised, in conditions that would make any reasonable person question whether the promises were real. And you learned it, imperfectly and inconsistently, and with more wavering than you would have liked, which is to say you learned it exactly the way every human being learns everything that actually changes them at the root level. And because you learned it, what is coming now has somewhere real to land. Blessing poured into a life that has not developed the capacity to trust through difficulty cannot be sustained at the level I intend for it to reach. But your capacity has been built. What I am releasing into your life now will not leak out through the cracks of an unprepared foundation. It will stay. It will compound. It will grow into dimensions you do not yet have the framework to imagine. Type Amen, type 222 right now if you are declaring yourself ready to step fully into the new season that has been prepared for you after everything you have walked through. There is one more thing I want to speak to before I bring you into the declaration of what is coming, and it is the shame. Because I know it is there, and I know you are careful about where you take it out, and I know the voice that planted it has been very persistent and very strategic about the moments it chooses to remind you of its conclusions. The voice that visits you in the vulnerable hours and makes the case that the reason your life has looked the way it has looked is not circumstance, not season, not preparation, but something fundamentally and irremediably broken at your core.